Whoops, I had my volume on my laptop. Rookie mistake. Hello, everybody. Welcome to LLK number 59. That is Knit with Laura and Lola. For those of you that are new to my lives, welcome. For those of you who've been joining Lola and I for a while, welcome back. To introduce myself, my name is Laura Nelkin. I'm a knitwear designer. I live in upstate New York in the Finger Lakes region, and I am joined in my lives by my alter ego, Lola. Lola's a little bit more spicy than I am. She can say inappropriate things like she was just doing in the live chat while we were waiting for this to start. I had to convince her to put a shirt on because it's been hot up here in upstate New York, as I know it has been in many parts of the country. So I hope that everybody is staying as cool as possible. Up here outside of Ithaca, we have lived for many, many years without AC, and we live in an old farmhouse that was built in the 1850s. And I will tell you that it's been a little bit unbearable the last few days. And today I went to water the plants outside, and then I watered myself with the hose, and that felt really good, and it dried off really quickly. So that's one technique for staying cool. I'm kind of working on rocking the crown braid situation. I get my hair very, very wet, and then I braid it and wrap it around my head. And I believe that that works as a tiny baby air conditioner for myself. So I've been playing with that. Some days it comes about better than others. We'll see how long this one lasts. So welcome. Just to set things up for the evening, those of you who have watched lives before, you know that there is a chat thread that you all are chatting in some while I am talking. If you want to introduce yourselves in there, I see people introducing themselves. I try hard during the lives to not look over at the chat too often because I get distracted very, very quickly. And then I know many of you are going to be watching this live later. And if you're watching later and I'm interacting too much with the live chat, I think that that can get a little bit distracting for you. If you're watching later, there is an option in YouTube to have the live chat playing so you can see the live chatter as you are watching in case you feel like you missed out and you want to kind of see what everybody's yakking about on the sideline. I see someone here from Boynton Beach, which is where my parents live. And see there, I was already bad. I already looked over and read the live chat while I was talking to you. So I hope that everybody is staying cool. Yes, I am wearing Ola Lola, and so is Goldie. She is wearing Ola Lola. So in tonight's live, I'm going to start out talking a bit about Ola Lola, which is the latest pattern that I released. I released it right before we went on our adventure. I'm going to be talking about lots that has been on my needles and off my needles. And then I have a pretty chunky slideshow for you to tell you about my adventure to the Faroe Islands. On purpose, as we were traveling, I didn't share too much, partially because I just wanted to get really into it and not worried too much about what was happening on social media or trying to keep up with all of that. It was so nice to take a break. And this way I can really share with you all and give you details. I know many of you are intrigued about the Faroe Islands as a knitting destination, and I'm pretty excited to share what we learned and did while we were there. I'll also show you some books that I bought in Faroe Islands, some yarn that I acquired, a sweater that I bought for myself. And then at the end of the live, I'll talk to you about some upcoming travel and workshop experiences that we have coming down the pike. And then a little bit about my sewing and food, and wrap things up with the winner from the last giveaway. And then let you know what the giveaway is for this live, and that winner will be announced on the next live. So that's me setting expectations for our hour plus time together, and let's jump right in. My cat just barged into the studio, which is highly amusing. She's this tiny little black thing. She takes one shoulder and she kind of goes like this, and she chonks the door open. And now she's going to lead my husband out of the studio with her, potentially. Little cutie. She's a little too shy probably to come up on camera, but Max could try and toss her over to me if you want, Max. Put little wings on that baby. So where am I starting? I'm starting with Ola Lola. See, highly distractible. It already happened. Some people are knitting Ola Lola. Some people purchase the pattern and are waiting on their yarn to come. Other people are already like off and running with their Ola Lola. Ola Lola is a side-to-side sweater. It uses my Novus construction, which I have been working on for about the last 7 or 8 years. So you're casting on it one sleeve. It can be knit with a long sleeve, with a short sleeve, or with a cap sleeve. You cast on at one end of the sleeve and you work across to the other end, and then you finish your Ola Lola with side panels. One thing that I've been noticing, we have a really great thread happening in the Ravelry group for people who have questions as they run into them. 3/4 of the time when I check the Ravelry group like morning, late afternoon, and evening, and oftentimes by the time I get there to answer a question, somebody else has already chimed in with the answer, because people are asking similar questions and they've already been answered. So it's kind of like helping people find the answers, or somebody who already asked that question and figured out the answer. I know that some people who are having a hard time getting gauge are kind of going up and down in needle size to get gauge. I do give information in the pattern about working a gauge swatch. It is pretty important to hang that gauge swatch overnight, which I describe in the pattern in depth. But if you have any questions as you're knitting it, or you're wondering about like what to do, row gauge is more important than stitch gauge when you're working a side-to-side sweater. So I wanted to show you how to do one thing on my needles, and that is how to do the neckline split, because I saw a few people were having questions with how to work that stitch. And of course I forgot to have that pattern ready to go, but I'm pretty sure I remember exactly how that stitch worked. So I'll be able to just jump right in and do it. And I'm going to show you under the camera here a swatch where I did that neckline split, and then I'm going to show you why I did this interesting maneuver that is not quite what you would think you would be doing. And it's because what's happening is you have an even number of stitches on both sides of the neckline split, and if you just dropped your yarn for the front and then attached yarn for the back, what ends up happening, and I have some on the needles right here to show you, if we did that, you would end up with this point at the neckline split at the shoulder where you would have this kind of strand of yarn right here that would become a really weak point at the shoulder. So the pattern says that the shoulder maneuver does not add any stitches. It's worked over 2 stitches, but what happens is unique. So I'm just going to work it for you. The first thing that you'll do is, after you worked across the front, just pretend that is your front stitches. You're going to slip, slip, knit, and work those 2 stitches together. But what you want to do is leave those 2 stitches on the needles, and then you're going to go in and knit those 2 stitches together. And then you're going to take that last stitch work and put it back on the left hand needle, and then you're going to attach a new yarn and work across. And you can see what that does right there is make this point at the shoulder point that is much more structured. You can see that right there as well. And as I'm telling you this, I'm starting to doubt myself because I forgot to have the pattern in front of me when I was doing this. And I'm worried that I, in the pattern, say to knit 2 together and then slip, slip, knit. If anybody has access to their pattern, they could chime in the live chat and tell me. But if I worked it the other way, what you would do is knit 2 together. No, it's definitely the slip, slip, knit version. I'm definitely right. I did it correctly. Thank you, Susie. I was trusting myself, and then, I'd start to doubt myself a little bit. But what that maneuver does is really make a nice, tight and tidy point at the neckline split so that you don't have a weak point right there. And sometimes with patterns, it's really nice to know the why behind a maneuver, especially when it's a maneuver that you've never seen before. That is a maneuver I used quite a long time ago, I believe in Pacificus, but I saw that it was tripping people up, so I wanted to show it again. So that is a little tidbit about Ola Lola. I know some people are getting, I would say, a little bit confused about how to work the stitch maps. And if you have any questions about that, once you get rolling with the stitch maps, I think they're very easy to work with, but ask questions and we will get you going with the first few rows. The cat won't leave the studio. You can just leave her in here and maybe she'll join us at some point. She's rolling around. I think, so the studio is the only room in the house that has air conditioning, so I do not blame that tiny little black furry thing for wanting to stay with the air conditioning. Hey, Max, she wants out now. He missed that entirely. There we go. They're distracting me. It's not the live chat. It's the creatures. Okay, so moving on from Ola Lola, I want to talk about other stuff that is on and off my needles. So off my needles is another Quentas collar. Quentas was May's Lola's Choice kit, and I haven't done a live, I think, since April, so I haven't talked about May's Lola's Choice kit with you all. May's Lola's Choice kit was Quentas collar and Quentas scarf, and there's a cowl version of it, and everybody got this really beautiful steel gray yarn, and they could make the collar. It was 100% or 60% recycled linen yarn. It was a DK weight yarn. Take that back, 85% recycled linen and 15% premium linen. It had 3 different colors of size 6 beads in it, and you could either make this collar which was attached to a 5-strand slide clasp, or you could make this little scarflet called Quentas scarf that had beads placed on elongated stitches. And then I knit myself a version in turmeric or mustard, I believe this one was called, when I just released kits last week when we got home. And then I also made myself a collar version of Quentas. I got this idea from Lois, which was a great idea to start with a provisional cast on and then graft at the end. And this color is navy, and I wasn't able to get that many skeins of the navy color. Unfortunately, the manufacturer sold out, and they said that there were going to be restocking it in 14 weeks, and the site still says that, and it says that 6 weeks ago. So I have no idea when navy is going to be back in stock, but when it is back in stock, I will definitely let you know in my email newsletter, because a lot of people wanted that color, and it kind of ran out the door very, very quickly. I'm loving wearing my Quentas collar in summertime. It's so nice to have this kind of like hefty linen piece that I can just wear with a tank top and kind of be tagging myself as a knitter without having like any heavy wool on me. For those wondering, the Ola Lola that I am wearing was knit in Queen City Yarn Coleman, which is a 65% silk, 35% linen. So it's a great summer weight yarn. And then the one behind me is knit in 100% Spanish wool called Cautiva from Wool Dreamers. And we're actually going to the mill when we are in Spain in November for Knit Spain, and I'm very excited to get to see what they do at that mill. I'm not sure that they've had many groups there before, and I'm very much looking forward to getting to go there. So that's kind of a little side about Quentas. The kits look like this. They've got everything in there that you need. Each of the patterns, you'll choose between the patterns, and both patterns have video tutorials. The collar can be made with an I-cord tool or with double pointed needles with just regular beaded I-cord, and the video goes over both of those versions as you decide which you want to do. I know that many of you wanted that navy color. I wanted one in the navy color too, and I made one, and then that seemed to be silly. I had no idea it was sold out when I chose that color as my sample. Otherwise, I really would have waited and released it later, which would have been easier to do. But when it's back in, I promise to let you know. Other things off my needles, I have been thrilled by how well Larch Peds are doing. So in my Facebook group, we're having a short sock knit along, and Larch Peds, for those of you who don't remember Larch Peds, we're March March's Lola's Choice pattern, and they are short socks. They are not long socks. They have a lined cuff, and I use a new trick in there called Lola's Pickup Line for the heel. And doing that, I've never done a knit along in my Facebook group, and it's super fun. And I feel like a lot of people are kind of finding out about my patterns and finding out about the Facebook group because of the way that Facebook works. New people are coming in there daily and getting excited about the pattern, and it's been very fun to support everybody as they knit Larch Peds. And what it's done is really motivated me to like ride the Larch Ped train, is what I was saying to Max the other night. Like, it's a fun pattern and I want to knit more of them. So when we were in Faroe, I found this SockYarn. It's a worsted weight SockYarn. It's an 8-ply SockYarn that is self-striping from Lang. And I was like, I think Larch slippers would be just like the best thing ever. So this slipper is not blocked yet, but what I did was I gave it a princess sole. So if I put it underneath the camera so you can really see that, princess sole is a sole where the knit stitches are on the inside and the purl stitches are on the outside, so that when you're stepping inside your sock, it's smooth on the inside of your slipper, which is really, really nice feeling at the bottom of your foot, especially when you are working with a larger gauge yarn. And then one thing I did on this first one, which I'm going to do differently on the second one, is the original Larch Ped has ribbing on the inside of the lining of the cuff, and I'm finding on this slipper that it's like a little bit too bulky to have ribbing in there. So I'm actually going to switch that and just do stockinette stitch on the inside of the cuff instead of ribbing. And I think it's actually going to make the inside of the cuff easier to work. For those of you who've been doing it in the with the ribbing, that's probably the trixiest part, the lining with the short rows. So I'll be doing another version with that. And then my plan is for that, and you know my plans always change because stuff comes up, but I'm going to size it for the whole family and then release it like in October, maybe 1st of November for holiday knitting, because there's plenty of time. They're fast to knit. If I can get it out sooner than that, I will, but I already kind of have a schedule of things coming, so I have to see where I can easily fit it in. When I get these extra ideas, they have to, I have the commitments that I know I have to do design-wise, and then those extra ideas, it would be very easy for me to just get completely sucked in to the idea I have in a moment and then forget like, oh, there's a club kit that needs to get out, right? Those things come first, and then the extra little projects that I come up with come later. So speaking of that, also off my needles is the second project for the End Club. So those of you in the End Club, that project is done. It's going to the tech editor tomorrow or Monday, and all the yarn is on its way here, and we'll be building those kits soon. The July Lola's Choice kit has been done for a while, and that kit is almost done being built. That was being built while I was gone by the teen who helps me out, and that will be shipping by July 1st. And I have a new technique that I came up with, and is it okay if I tease you with a new technique that I'm going to show you, but I'm not going to tell you what you're going to be doing it with, and I'm not going to give you like too much information about it. You can use your own mind to be like, what would we do with this? But you know that I love working with Stitch Saver, and I came up with a new thing to do with Stitch Saver that basically makes a separate layer of fabric. So instead of having one layer of fabric, you can have a second layer of fabric. So I'm going to switch to my overhead camera, and I think maybe I'll even zoom in, and I'll zoom in with the caveat that my nails are trashed because I've been gardening a lot and I did not have time to get back to the nail place to get them done again. And so you all love me and you'll forgive my nails for this. I'll just try to cheat them a little bit. So here's just a swatch. This swatch has nothing to do with the July Lola's Choice kit. It's just some yummy DK weight yarn that I had lying around. I think this is some Emma's yarn left over from a low lumber kit. And you can see that I'm holding my Stitch Saver behind my my knitting right there. And what I'm going to do is just wrap my working yarn around the Stitch Saver, and then I'm going to knit a stitch and then I'm going to take that yarn and wrap it around the stitch saver, and then I'm going to knit another stitch, and then I'm going to take that yarn and wrap it around and knit another stitch, and I'm going to continue that way all the way across. I'm probably not going to go all the way across right now, but what you would do is do this all the way and then continue knitting. And when you continue knitting, you're working a layer of fabric right here, and you have your yarn wrapped around that stitch saver right there, so that what you can do is take those stitches from the stitch saver. Do I have another needle here? Let's grab another needle. And then take a needle, slide those stitches onto a needle. Let's see if it works with that needle in there. And then go ahead and work those stitches so that you end up working a second layer of fabric underneath this fabric. So you have 2 layers of knit fabric without having to pick up any stitches. So if you've ever been in a situation with like a turned hem, I'm trying not to give away what I'm using it for, an application that I can think of that would be brilliant, and I want to rewrite this pattern. If anybody has time for a quick test knit, I think I can rewrite it very quickly to add this in. I have a pattern called flip top mittens that I designed when, sorry, I'll go back to the main camera, when I was at Schaefer Yarn Company, and they have, they're like a fingerless mitten that has a top on it. And the tricksy part of that pattern is the point where you're creating 2 layers of fabric where stitches are getting held for the top flap and then other stitches are being worked for the rest of the fingerless mitt. And this is going to make doing that so much easier. It's kind of like double knitting without all the slip stitches, but you end up with like 2 really unique layers of fabric. Whereas double knitting, sometimes your stitches kind of like cross over to each other. I see that some of you remember those flip top mittens. It's one of my oldest patterns and it's great. It's sized for the whole family, but there's a tricksy bit that helping people get through that like 1.5 rows. This is going to solve that problem. And I'm very excited about it. And I'm kind of shocked I came up with something else new that we can do a stitch saver. And I will tell you that I'm playing with this technique in another upcoming design end club. That's all I'm going to say. I love a little tease. Well, that's Lola. Lola loves a little tease. So you'll see more. We'll do a full kind of technique video for that once the Lola's Choice pattern comes out. Because it creates 2 layers of fabric, I'm thinking about calling it, are you ready for this? Lola's 2-timing technique or Lola's 2-timer or something like that. I kind of love Lola's 2-timing technique, but if you have another idea that you think would be pretty funny, I am open to your suggestions as well. So Buffy barged in and all of the air conditioning is leaving this room, and I'm just going to go boot her out of here and close that door really tightly. Look, that worked. I just got up and she ran out of here. So I'll use my loud voice, closing the door really tightly. There you go. It's pretty exciting around here tonight. Thank you, Melanie. I see you. So I'll reach out to people as saying that they're psyched to test that little idea with the flip top mittens. I think, Melanie, I remember you knitting them for Knitting Etc. That pattern's been around quite some time. So the other thing that's off my needles is the design for the trip that I'm taking with a group to the Aran Islands in September. And I have to say that it was very fun to be knitting on a design in the Faroe Islands at a place with lots of rocks and water, to be knitting with people when I go to another island with lots of rocks and water. It just felt like very appropriate. It was with me in Faroe and it was with me in Iceland, and they bounded off when I got home. And yarn has already been ordered for the kits for that. And I'm actually hoping that that yarn is going to get to everybody on that trip ahead of time so that you have a chance to get knitting on it and potentially finish it either during the trip or before the trip, so you can like take pictures on the Aran Islands with it. It is knit with a yarn that is milled in Ireland, but I was able to get it in the States. It's a really yummy yarn, and you're gonna hear more about that. I'm just like one big giant tease tonight. I've been knitting a lot. Also, can you tell? I love knitting. I'm also going to say about the Aran Islands project that it will be available for all after the trip. So you guys will see sneak peeks while we're away, and then it'll get released either while I'm still gone or right when I get back. Also working on a mystery knit along for Caltober. And the name is so good. We already have like a whole concept. We have like a mood board. I already found a lot of puns. I don't want to tell you too much, but I'm psyched for Caltober this year. This is like one of my favorite months of the year. On the needles, I'm working on a second version of the N Club design because I loved the first one so much and I had enough yarn left over to do something a little like smaller version of it. So I'm working on that right now. That should be done pretty quickly. That Lolette hug that I showed you the last time I did a live is in time out because I got to the point where I could try it on and it was too bulky right here. For some crazy reason, I blame this on Lola. I decided to do some Lola decided to do some garter stitch right at the underarm area, and it's just like tight and bulky and stupid. So I am going to rip back and I'm going to look at my math. I might even fix the sleeve panels to make them wider up here so there's just like some more ease. I want it to be like a little looser and flowier. And no, Andrea, there are no owls in Caltober this year. We're moving on from that. It's better. How could it be better than an owl? But it is. So that's getting ripped back. And then the large slippers I'm going to be working on. I have that second one going on soon. And then the Lola's Choice September kit yarn got here that I want to play with. And I got a goodie when I went to H&H at the beginning of April that I think I'm going to be able to incorporate into the September design. So that's on my docket to play with this weekend once I kind of get through a few other things on my list. Pretty excited about that. So that's kind of everything I've been knitting on my needles, what I'm thinking about. I've got a pile of yarn over here to the side that I got when I'm away. So I think it's time for us to jump right into Faroe. And then I will show you the yarn that I got in Faroe and the books that I got in Faroe, which are pretty exciting. And then we'll talk about a few other things. Sound good? You guys all have your knitting still and you have like a little bevy and you're good and happily knitting away. One thing I forgot to tell you at the beginning of this live is at the end of the live, I will give you links to everything that I am talking about in the live. So once it's over, if you come back like 15 minutes after it's over and look at the notes section of the tutorial of this video, you will see links to everything that I've talked about. You can also just go to Ravelry and look for Larch Peds if, for example, you're looking for the Larch Peds, which I might have noticed somebody was doing in the chat. And I saw somebody else answer her. Thank you, Sherry. Okay, distracted. Faroe, are you ready? So I have a little bit of a background for Faroe Islands, and I think the most important thing is to kind of talk about a tiny bit of history about the Faroe Islands, how I found out about the Faroe Islands. But first, I would love to talk to you about where the heck the Faroe Islands are, because some people, almost everybody I've talked to in Trumansburg, New York, was like, where are the Faroe Islands? I think a lot of people have been Googling them. So the Faroe Islands are in the very middle of the North Sea. So in this image right here, the Faroe Islands are south and east of Iceland. They are west of Norway, and they are north of the UK. They're kind of right in the middle right there. They have like there's a gold star on there and a lot of hearts. If you look kind of, I would say, east and south a tiny bit, you will see another archipelago of islands with a gold star in it. That is Shetland right there. So that gives you an idea of where the Faroe Islands are. They are an archipelago in the North Atlantic that has 17 inhabited islands and many more uninhabited islands. They are an autonomous territory of the Kingdom of Denmark. And Faroe, interestingly, was named by the Vikings when they arrived there from Norway. And the name is derived from the word fair, which in Old Norse means sheep. And I guess the Vikings got there and were like, oh, there's a heck of a lot of sheep on these islands. Let's name it Sheep Islands. That's what they say anyway. So that makes sense to me. If I move in even closer, you really get an idea of how many islands there are. And when Max and I first started looking at going to Faroe, we were like, how do you get around in Faroe? Like, are there ferries everywhere? There are tunnels all over the place. It takes an hour and 15 minutes to go all the way from one end of all of those islands all the way to the other end of the islands from like east to west, and then north to south is a similar amount. One of the tunnels, and this is a fun fact if you go to trivia night at some point, it has the world's only underwater roundabout in a tunnel. And there are some long ass tunnels, like big tunnels. Some of them go through mountains, some of them go underwater. You're like, where are we going? You kind of take a hard right, you go down a hill, you come around, all of a sudden you just go through a tunnel. You can see an island way in the distance as you're getting ready to go in that tunnel, and then you come out on that island, which is amazing. Some of the tunnels don't have a toll. Many of them do have a toll, which really makes sense. That's a way that they can build them and maintain them. But they've made it so that instead of it taking like 2 hours from somebody to get to Sandoy over to Torshavn, like driving and then waiting for the ferry and getting on the ferry and then getting off the ferry and then driving the rest of the way, in 15 minutes now they can go from Torshavn to Sandoy to their house, which is pretty brilliant. And it was engineering feats, all of those tunnels. We went through some of the tunnels that were very old, and you could really appreciate the older tunnels and the newer tunnels. We went through some tunnels that were one lane, so there'd be like a light, and then if you didn't make the timing, you were waiting for a while before it was your turn. One set of tunnels we went to all the way in the north and east, there were 2 tunnels with like a break in the middle to get down to a little village and a waterfall. And if you didn't make the timing, you had to wait a while until you could go through one tunnel, get out into the sunlight for a second, and then go into the second tunnel. It was so freaking fun. Really, really loved that piece of the puzzle. Getting back to the sheep side of things. So I really love to travel to countries that have more sheep than people. The Faroe Islands has about 50,000 people living on it right now. And because it's lambing season and they haven't done any kind of like harvesting or culling of the lambs, somebody said there that there's maybe like 250,000 sheep right now. That seems like a lot. Maybe it's a little bit less than that. They're a short tail breed, and my understanding of the sheep breed is that originally when the Vikings got there, it was a breed that was unique to the Faroe Islands, and then they had a few rough winters and they lost almost all their stock of sheep on the island. So they ended up bringing some sheep from some of the Scottish Isles that were quite hardy, and Shetland and Iceland, and kind of engineered a breed that is really hardy and great for the Faroe Islands. And they obviously did a really good job because they are thriving on that island and they're everywhere. Like, you don't look for deer when you're driving, you look for like a lamb or a sheep running out in the road, and that is pretty constant. You know, I didn't get to do a lot of knitting while Max was driving because it was my job to navigate and also make sure we didn't kill any sheep. And I did a good job. Those sheep were killed by us on that trip. Pretty proud. I think I already said that they were short-tailed sheep. The other thing I wanted to say is that knitting has always been very big on the Faroe Islands, kind of similarly to the Shetland Islands. In Norway originally was... Faroe Islands was originally part of the Kingdom of Norway before it became part of the Kingdom of Denmark, and the Norway was buying all Faroese sweaters for all of their Norwegian military in the 1800s. In the 1850s, sweaters and socks were Faroe's main export. So the spinning and knitting of sweaters and socks for export was their main export. Now it is salmon, and I think knitting and sheep is a little bit more for local consumption. There is one, maybe two, but one mill that I know of on the islands. We didn't end up getting to go to it. Interestingly, there was a strike on when we were there. A strike started about 2 weeks before we went. We actually were not sure until the day we left that we were definitely going, because with the strike on, the dock workers were striking and the sanitation workers were striking, and there was no fuel on the island and also no fresh food. So there was like canned food and stuff, but there were no fruits and vegetables. There was no fresh meat. There were no eggs. And Max and I just weren't really sure we should like go and be a burden on a country that was kind of going through some strife. And our Airbnb host just like really wanted us to come, and our rental car was canceled, but 2 of our Airbnb hosts actually found us cars. So we had 2 cars to choose from, and we ended up with 1 tank of gas for the whole time that we were there. And we were just really deliberate about like what days we drove where, and made sure that we really had a very planned out route and we weren't using any more resources than necessary. So we actually returned the car and there was still like over a quarter tank of gas in the car. And we ate dried apricots. For those of you who are wondering about our constitutions, we were okay. And I felt really bad for the people living there because the strike ended up being about a month. It ended 2 days after we left, and kids were out of school. And I think a lot of people had kind of bought big bags of potatoes and bought fruit and avocados and whatever. And then the docks opened back up and they were able to like get fresh stuff back onto the island. But it was interesting to be in a country when it was going through something like that. I am very chatty and I want to get into photos with you because it was so pretty. So we got there, and we like to, when we get somewhere, especially when we have long travel days, we flew through Reykjavik, through Iceland, and we like to kind of land when we first get to a place. So we went to the island of Sandoy, which is one of the southern islands, and we were able to get there on a tunnel. We didn't have to take a ferry. We were trying to avoid taking a ferry after traveling for 24 hours. And we ended up staying at this Airbnb that basically had kind of like a rock dune in front of it. And this was the view as you kind of like hiked up over that rock dune. So we were kind of on the water but protected. And the coolest thing about this is another view from up there on the dune. The coolest thing about this Airbnb is they had this whole kind of grassy, rocky slope going up over the rock dune, and there were sheep living on there. So we had like literal sheep TV from the couch, and we could just sit on our couch with our coffee and me with my knitting and kind of get over jet lag and watch sheep TV. And we were like cracking up about it. It was highly, highly amusing to get to have that. One of the reasons that I wanted to go to Sandoy was to see this infamous knitted rock that is a yarn bomb giant boulder. I tried to get the scale of this boulder for you all, that is covered in knitting by the local women knitters of Sandoy. And it is taken down every winter. It's up from like May to September, so I felt very lucky to be able to see it. It was clearly just hung when I got to see it, so you could really appreciate that it had been cleaned up and things had been kind of like re-knit. It was really well taken care of. It had just the most whimsical little details on it. Like, look at this creepy baby. You guys all know I love a creepy baby, and the horse, and it is all has everything on there has to do with a myth about this witch who lives in a cave. And if you Google knitted rock Sandoy, you can kind of read that whole myth and learn more about it. I feel like it's really important when I do things like this to tell you that just because I went somewhere 10 days does not make me an expert in a place. So everything I learned about it, I learned from watching videos and reading, and then going there and then coming back and reading more and asking people questions when I was there. But I am, clearly not Faroese. I am sure I am butchering how you say everything in Faroese. It's a very hard language. I tried to learn just a little bit. But I feel like that's always important to say when I'm traveling. So that is the knitted rock on Sandoy. And then I had a glorious solo hike, just the first full day we were there, to burn off some energy, and saw a lot of sheep. And this is another sheep that Max and I saw on another hike that we did. And I loved this sheep in particular because if you look over on the left, it was napping right in the hiking trail we were going up. And so it had to get up to move. And then it's really hard to get pictures of sheep because they're kind of like constantly trying to get away from you. And the picture all the way on the right is like one of the best sheep pictures I've ever taken. And I got it because it had to pee because it had probably been sleeping really hard for a while. And so it stood still and I could really like get my camera right and compose the shot. And I don't think you can tell that it's going to the bathroom. So good on me. Here's an awesome thing about Faroe. There are knitting stores everywhere. The first full or second full day we went into Torshavn, which is the capital city, and I knew that in Torshavn there was a street that was like the knitting street. So if you were on a cruise and you were getting off in Torshavn for the day, if you just kind of like walked up from the cruise docks, you would go through and buy all of the knitting stores. There were knit designers that had some really interesting pieces. I'll show you those in a second. And then a bunch of different knitting stores. I think just in Torshavn alone, we went into like 3 or 4 knitting stores. The main mill on Faroe, Snælden, I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong. They had a shop there and also pieces that they had knit. And then there were a bunch of different designers that had shops. And then over on the right side, there was yarn in all of the like gas stations and in the grocery stores. So you could literally be like, I need a can of coconut milk and I need some SockYarn right now. And the yarn in the gas stations and in the grocery stores was mostly the Navia yarn, which is the other mill. So there's like 2 mills and one of them is Snælden and the other one is Navia. And I'll show you some yarns that I got from there. These photos I took at 2 different designers' shops. I forget the name of the one in the middle. I wrote it down somewhere. But the ones, I think it's 3 different designer shops actually. The one all the way on the left was at Gudrun and Gudrun, and she's probably the most famous Faroese knitwear designer. I'll show you a sweater in a second that she made really iconic on the knitting show The Killing, the Danish version of The Killing, which is on my list to watch at some point. That middle sweater I took a photo of because look, it combines knitting and crochet in one of the coolest ways I've ever seen. I don't know if you can see that closely, but the center panel of that sweater looks like double crochet and then it's stockinette stitch on each side, which I think is really, really interesting. And then over on the right-hand side was another designer shop that we went into, and I tried on that little checkerboard number and the proportions just weren't right on my body. I think if I was taller, like 7 or 8 inches taller, like my buddy Foxy could wear that sweater really well, but it just wasn't right on my proportions. So I didn't get it. This is kind of interesting. These are the sweaters that I saw kind of everywhere around the Faroe Islands. The one all the way on the left is very similar to the one that Gudrun and Gudrun made famous in The Killing. And it is based on a stitch pattern that is in a famous Norwegian stitch pattern book, which I am going to show you when we get to the book section. I managed to get one for me and one for you. And so that sweater, these are all knit with like an Aran weight brushed alpaca. So they're not knit with Faroese yarn. They're like light and floofy and there's lots of space in between the needles. And I know it's an exaggeration when I say everybody was wearing them, but you guys, everybody was wearing these sweaters, particularly like the teenage girls when it was 47 degrees out and we were both like, they look cold. Like you and I know that brushed alpaca is somewhat warm, but you could see a lot of skin going through and they're wandering around at night in their brushed alpaca sweaters looking awesome. And so it's very fun to see so many people wearing hand knit sweaters all over. So Torshavn had a ton of knitting stores and the gas stations had yarn and that was all well and good. But the second place that we stayed was a little town called Leirvik, and that was so we could go to Klaksvik and beyond north from there. And we went into Klaksvik one day and It's the second biggest city in Faroe. It is not a very big city. It basically has like one main street and there's people living out and around it. And they do have, maybe they had 2 grocery stores and 2 gas stations, one on each end. But I mean, we found 1 or 2 cafes. There were not many restaurants there. There were 4 knitting stores. I'm serious. There were 4 knitting stores in this town, and I would go in and chat with them. Max was very, very patient while I kind of got my full of the knitting stores. And at one of them, I was like, there are 4 knitting stores in your tiny town. How is that possible? I was like, is it for tourism? Are y'all doing okay? And they were like, no, it's for the Faroese. We love to knit. So that's all I could say, right? It's Pharaoh's heaven. People love to knit there, and they one town can support 4 knitting stores. They all had really interesting yarns in them. They were all a little bit different. There were a lot of finished goods, like designers were knitting with yarns from Faroe and other yarns and then selling those finished goods as well. But hand knitting seemed to be really respected and worn. I'm sure some pieces are done with machines and then finished by hand. That's the same in Shetland, so no different than there. I agree that their priorities are right. So if we go back to this, so cool. The other thing I got a whole hell of a lot of was like honey pullover. I love that rusty shed. So this photo, y'all in the N Club are going to be seeing it again soon. That was my inspo for our 3rd design. So you can start to imagine what is coming down the pike. But I just fell in love with this rusty shed. There were some other sheds that had like amazing blue roofs and orange roofs. And part of it was the light was so unique because we didn't have very many very clear days. It was always like a little gray, a little rainy, a little cloudy. It was always light very, very late at night. I don't think it ever got like super dark all the way there because it is our signature color mashup, Andrea. If you and I had a baby, we would be that rusty shed. How about if we built a house? It would be, that rusty shed would be our house. This was the view from our 2nd Airbnb in Leirvik. We were on a little harbor, and it might have been a loud spot to have a place, but because of the strike, the boatyard was very, very quiet there. And it was just an absolutely gorgeous view to look at and get an eyeful as we were taking breaks. We went for an epic drive one day. It was very windy outside, so we would like jump out of the car, do a little walk, take some photos, get an eyeful, and like go on to the next place. So beautiful. This is the sun setting one night from our view of our Airbnb. This is just basically what it looked like all the time when we were driving. Like breathtaking. Green, 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 green. If you squint as you're looking at this, you'll see some sheep on those hills right there. Lola took this picture of this rock. You can do what you want with that photo, you know. This was a really rainy, fun hiking day that we did in, I'm going to not say this name right, it's called Gjove. It's like Gjogv. I just don't want to say it entirely wrong, but you can see a waterfall there in the distance. Waterfalls everywhere, lots of rocks and water. Just like, there's Max for scale. I tried to get lots of pictures with Max for scale so you could get an idea. We found some puffins on the rocks here that we had to be pretty patient to see them. And then there was a seal in the water. So we were out there for a while watching him. This is the natural harbor at Gjove. So this natural harbor is one of the harbors that the Vikings used to come in. And it's like amazing to me, if the sea is looking as rough as Max is, the harbor's like just to the left of him around the corner. So for someone in a Viking ship to feel confident enough to not go to that rough area where all those rocks are, but know that there's like a sweet little spot that you could bring your boat into this natural harbor right there, blows me away. We were definitely like, I cannot believe that. And then we did a fun hike up from there and got some views. Another day we went on a boat trip and we were supposed to go to these birding cliffs in Vestmanna, but the wind and the rain was too rough in that direction. So we went down and around and went to this really cool cave that had some of the prettiest colors that I've ever seen, and I really want to send this to a dyer. They were really subtle, like you can kind of appreciate that limey green and yellow and rose and taupe. They're not like colors that are like, yes, I'm in your face, but I could have just stayed in that cave and gotten an eyeful forever in there. But we didn't. We clearly had to move on. This is one of the pictures I got on the day that we took a ferry to Mishins. And so yeah, I think I said that right, Mishins. Mishins is an island that has 8 people living on it. They have a tiny little village, and they have a very large puffin colony there, and also a gannet colony there. So you could get a ferry over to Mishins and be over there for 3 or 4 hours, and then you have to sign up for a guided hike to go up the hill to see the puffins. They don't like really let people up there on their own without going on the guided hike, which I think is really smart. And we got pretty up close to the puffins. This is one of the views from the hike as we were walking, and there are some puffins right there sitting on that cliff. I was jealous of the people with the big cameras. I wasn't jealous of the people hiking up the hill with the big cameras, but once we got up there, I just had my phone with me. So the fact that I got this photo with my phone, and you can actually see a bird flying in the background. I'm not entirely sure from this angle if it is a puffin or a gannet flying back there, but puffins are basically like flying potatoes. They're a little clumsy. When they land, they kind of like crash into the hillside. They have these burrows in the hill, and they'll kind of go into them and pop their heads back out again. They make this great little noise. It's like a little grunty and like a little like annoyed, like you woke me up, and they kind of grunt at each other, and they're so freaking cute. Here's a few more. Andrew said that the wings didn't look long enough to be a gannet, so we're going to go with that. I got a puffin flying behind a puffin sitting. These guys were hanging out right by their burrow, and definitely one of my all-time favorite birds. This is Max and Laura for scale after we did that hike up there, and that's my very happy I just saw puffin's face. We did a lot of like, hey, can we take your picture? Will you take our picture kind of things with other tourists, which worked out well to get a few photos of us. This was a photo that I took, and I want you to remember this because I'm going to show you a sweater I bought, and you'll really see that I bought the sweater because of this rock and this lichen, and I just really love like light gray and yellow and taupes together. And the that water behind there is where the ferry came in from Mishnis. The ferry was very rough. Like when the ferry pulled up, the boat was rocking, and they kind of helped you jump off the ferry, and then when it was time to leave, they helped you jump back onto the ferry. And it was a rough ride, but we made it, and it was completely worth it. This is a view of the last village that we stayed in called Klaksvik. And Klaksvik is a tiny little village. Let me tell you about Klaksvik. It doesn't have a gas station. It doesn't have a convenience store. It doesn't have a cafe. Definitely not a dry cleaner. No pharmacy. Nothing else I can think of that like, no groovy coffee place with an espresso machine. But it had 2 knitting stores. Like seriously, this town, tiny, like maybe 50 inhabitants, maybe 75 houses. It was like the cutest little place in the world. 2 knitting stores, and one of them I went into, and it was called Klaksvik Knit. The other one was closed when I was there, and I went in there, and I just felt like I was home. There were people sitting in there knitting. It was full of hand knits knit by a cooperative of 40 women in Faroe who knit things and sell them there. You can see slippers hanging up above the window. You can see a fair number of the knits on that rack right there. There's more knits that are all knit by people in the cooperative along the wall. There are yarns that are naturally dyed by the owner, Susanna, up on the top. Those are all from the Snaildon mill that I told you about. So those are all Faroese wool that are mostly all dyed with Faroese plants. There's a few of them that use natural dye materials that are brought in like cochineal and indigo. It really was Knitter's Valhalla right here. And I went in and I saw them all knitting. And I was like, it was raining out. Max was reading his book. He's like deep into some fantasy series. We were having a quiet day and trying not to drive too much. And I was like, can I go back to my Airbnb and get my knitting and come knit with you guys? And they were like, sure. And I knew I was going to buy a few things. So I kind of like made a pile of things I wanted to get. And then I went back to my Airbnb and I got my knitting, and I told Max I'd be back at some point and to like text me if he needed me. And I went back and I hung out and knit with a group of women down there. There was a 10 or 11 or 12-year-old knitting her first sweater. And the owner, Susanna, was like absolutely lovely. I just felt at home immediately. Like, you all know that feeling when you get somewhere and you're like, oh, these people speak my language. Even though like we had a few language barriers, their English was, 800 million times better than my Faroese, which is non-existent. But at one point, they were picking up stitches for a button band on a sweater. And, I knew when not to talk. I knew when counting was happening. And they were definitely working on trying to do the spacing of the buttons and do the math for that. And I taught them how to use Stitch Saver. I had some Stitch Saver with me and they'd never seen it before. So I left Stitch Saver with them and like taught a few techniques. And Susanna, the woman who owns Kvivik Knit, is actually planning on doing some knitting workshops in her village, like week-long Faroese knitting workshops where you learn how to knit a sweater in the Faroese style, and you learn about like sheep and spinning and dyeing, and then do a few things around the Faroe Islands. And she has, I think, like room for 6 people in her Airbnb, and then there's one other Airbnb that can hold 6 people. So she's prepared to host people, and I have promised her that I will share with you all when she gets those kind of up and running, if anybody is interested in doing that. I see a few people raising their hands like, hell yeah. I am also thinking about doing a tour to Faroe in the future. That will take a little while to get together, but I would like to do a tour that's a little bit more like hiking and knitting based, where we have some big hikes and then also some knitting and some learning, and kind of combine those two things together, because I did not get enough of this magical, magical place. I did buy a sweater knit by Susanna. I actually chose it, and then she told me that she had knit it and dyed the yarn for it. And I have it with me here. I'll show it to you in a second. The yellow, that's Susanna over on the left, and she is knitting another sweater there, and she has like a drawing of a slipper that she's working on. They are Kvivik Knit on Instagram, so if you want to follow her, you'll get a really good idea of what's happening at that little absolutely awesome shop, and I'm sure that is where she will post about her trips. So this is the sweater that I got from Susanna. It is kind of a traditional Icelandic yoke, which they were trying to say is not an Icelandic yoke. It's actually like a Norwegian yoke or a Faroese yoke. I think there's a lot of crossover between all of these countries. It doesn't have sleeves, so this style vest is a really good shape for me. This is a shape that I can wear really comfortably. I think I'm really going to enjoy having this next winter, to have this kind of like body hugging vest when it's chilly out. So that yellow yarn at the top is knit with rhubarb, which is my favorite fruit in my garden. It's actually a vegetable, fun fact. And then the cream is just natural sheep color, and this is 100% Faroese wool. I really love it. I actually wear white, I think, really well in the winter, and I'm happy to have it. It looks good on camera, don't you think? I'm not going to wear it right now because I will get too hot. I feel a little singy tonight. So that was one of the things that I bought for myself. We did not buy a lot because I purposely did not have a lot of room in my bags. So jumping back, then I'm so glad that we ended our stay in Kvivik, because it was our last 3 nights in that area, and we did a lot from there. And then we went on to Iceland for the last 4 nights of our trip. And when we were in Faroe, it is not Faroe's fault. The weather was not great. There was a lot of rain. There was a lot of wind. It turns out it was exactly the same in Iceland. If we had been in Iceland, it was rainy and windy. But we got to Iceland and we got like the good weather. And the days were so long and absolutely stunning. And we finally wore our t-shirts and we got to like hike. And I'll tell you about some of the hiking we did. And we also did some wool stuff. But the colors were just like vibrating and beautiful. This was a bush outside of a crater that I fell in love with and had to take a picture of. That is me knitting on the Faroe Islands design and then putting it down to take a picture of it with a crater behind it. I took lots of pictures of this in situ as I was knitting it. This is like this glacial waterfall we went to with glacial water that was like this unbelievably icy blue color that was on the Golden Circle. And what was fun about being in this area of Iceland is I've been in Iceland before and I've been on the Golden Circle, but I've always done like the things that the tour buses do. They'll like go to Thingvellir, go to Old Geezer, go to the other waterfall whose name I'm going to forget right now. And Max and I on purpose tried to do other things a little bit that were on the Golden Circle to kind of see some other stuff. So one thing that meant was that there were less people because there were a lot of people in Iceland touring around. There I am knitting, actually. You can kind of see me for scale. I'm kind of hiding in the rocks because I'm wearing all dark colors, but I'm wearing my Knit for Food t-shirt. And so you can see me kind of hiding in there. Max got a picture of me knitting by the water. There's another view of that waterfall, and the rocks were just like all mossy. The colors were amazing. Another thing we did that day, and the reason I included this photo is if you've traveled with me to Iceland before, you will remember that we did a stop at a hydroponic farm and had really good tomato soup. Or if you have listened to me, like followed me when I've been on that adventure, you might remember the tomato soup where we went to a geothermal hydroponic tomato farm, had tomato soup and bread, and it was totally amazing. Well, now they have a wine bar. Of course they do. They also do the tomato soup thing. So Max and I stopped there and had a cocktail and had a bowl of tomato soup. And the tomato soup was not as good as I remember it, but the cocktail was one of the best cocktails I've ever had. So there's that. And then after we did that, we moved on to some more hiking, actually. And the next day, we had a lovely morning at our Airbnb, and then we went to the Thingborg Wool Collective that I was supposed to go to with the Ultimate Knitting Cruise group last year, and it was really great to get to see the shop. They have all Icelandic wool in there, and then they have all sweaters knit by Icelanders with Icelandic wool. I did buy a sweater there as well, but I don't have any photos of that in this set, I think. I'm not sure if I remember any. The other thing we did is Margaret, the woman who runs the cooperative, has a farm and she has sheep, and we got I can maybe show it to you if I get up because I have it right here. It's so pretty. We got this for Max's mom. And we're basically going to go see her on Sunday and be like, we got you a sheep. So this is a brown Icelandic sheepskin. It's so beautiful. It looks a lot like their chow, I'm realizing. So if Misha sits on it, they're just going to kind of blend right into each other, which is so cute. I might have also gotten myself one as well so I could have matching sheep to my mother-in-law. But after we chose them, Margaret told us that they were actually from her farm, which I really loved. And I'm very, very excited to have that sheepskin. I love throwing sheepskin over furniture that's gotten a little old. It's a great way to like refresh a piece of furniture that you don't want to recover or buy a new one. Let's get back to photos. I ended up getting one of those sweaters that's hanging right there. It might already be down at this point. You'll get to see it on me in the future. Oh, there it is. I'm wearing my sweater, and I am a very happy knitter look on my face. I see that other people have bought sweaters there in the past. It was really lovely to get to stop there. There I am wearing the sweater again. And you can see the ocean over my right shoulder, and then you can see a glacier over my left shoulder. It was just glorious in Iceland. This is Dyrhólaey. Dyrhólaey is a spot along the southern coast of Iceland that sometimes has puffins. We actually did find a few puffins there, but you had to be really patient and spend some time and kind of like get away from other people and be just a little calm. And the Derholi cracks me up because we have a big hole in our deck right now, a piece of wood kind of rotted out on our deck. And so when we came home, I made a road sign that looked just like the sign for Derholi in Iceland. And I like put it on some stakes in the deck so that nobody would trip on the hole in our deck. So it's our whole deck is affectionately called Derholi now. Y'all are welcome to steal that if you want to. That's Derholi. And there's a glacier in the distance. I don't remember the name of that glacier. And if I did, I'd probably pronounce it wrong anyway. But it was just absolutely a glorious day. And now we are back to Faroe again. I think the thing that's missing in these photos that I maybe forgot, I had a group of photos at the end that were from a hike that Max and I did. I'll find those at some point and like put them up on Facebook. We did a 7 waterfall hike that we started at like 9:30 or 10 at night and we ended at midnight because it never got dark in Iceland. We were like so close to the solstice, and it was a great time of night to hike because other people were like back at their hotels, and we just kept walking. It was so pretty and it wasn't getting dark, and to be on those trails and be able to be alone on those trails and experience them and just kind of like stop and take it all in, and the air is just like so crisp and refreshing. It was actually probably one of the best walks of my entire life. Max and I made some big memories that night, and we didn't get home till like almost 3 in the morning, maybe 2:45, and it was still light out, and the sun was like looked like it was setting in the north, but that's because it was just dipping down below the horizon to get ready to rise again. And like at 3:15 in the morning, I was like, I have to go to bed. It is about to get light out. It's really hard to sleep when there's not a lot of dark in the sky. For me anyway, I get really, really energized by it. So that was my trip. I am really chatty tonight. I want to move on to yarn and show you the yarns that I got, and then show you the books, which I'm very excited about, and then like roll into the giveaway and say goodnight. So some of the yarns that I got are from Navia, and this is 100% Faroese wool. It is milled in Faroe. It is with wool from Faroese sheep. This is a DK weight. Let me do it over the overhead so you can really see it right here. It's a DK weight that I got in 2 different colors. I am not going to lie to you. This is a toothy yarn. This is a yarn that screams, I am wool, I am yarn. And I think, and this is without me being too coy, the Lola's Choice July pattern is incredibly versatile. And it's going to end up becoming a really good like blank canvas for us all to play with. And I do believe that these 2 skeins together, and if there's any of my testers in here, we'll see if they chime in the live chat to agree with me, we'll be able to do something that will be kind of unique, but I think it'll help you see all of the things that that pattern can do and how different it could be. So that's what I'm thinking I'm going to do with these 2. I think that for my skin, they're going to be a little bit too toothy for me. Another yarn that I did post about, but I want to show it to you, is this DK weight SockYarn from Navia called, it's the Navia SockYarn, and the Aurora Borealis are the ones that have a little bit of color in them. And this SockYarn I am going to knit the larch slippers in because it's Faroese wool, Shetland wool, and Australian lamb's wool. So it's going to be nice and tough without needing any nylon in it, and I think it's going to make a really nice slipper fabric. But I need to swatch it to make sure that it works. But I have a very good feeling about this as a DK weight SockYarn that does not have any nylon in it. I'm very excited to play with that. I think that blend is really interesting between the Faroese and the Shetland and the lamb's wool. I already showed you this yarn that I got. These were big skeins and I got 2 of them, but I already basically knit up 1 of them. And then the other yarn I got, do you remember the sweaters I showed you, those brushed alpaca sweaters? I found this yarn called Fnugg. I mean, who doesn't want to just say Fnugg all day? And Fnugg is an Aran weight brushed alpaca, And this is like an olive green and a minty green, and they play so beautifully together. I can really see some kind of color work sweater in them one day, or a cowl or something. Fnugg actually means fluff in Norwegian, I believe, which I love knowing the etymology of a name, but you guys are all going to be like saying Fnugg from now on with me, right? So let's see, the next final skein of yarn that I bought is this tiny little skein. I was like, I can fit this in my boot on the way home, of cashmere silk. It's 65% cashmere and 35% silk. And I think it's going to make a really, really gorgeous Quentas scarflet. Like just a little tiny, awesome, yummy, fall-y, wintry. This is definitely my color. And I know that I extended the short sock knit along in the Facebook group through like August 15th or something like that. And I was thinking that when that knit along is done, we'll roll into a scarflet knit along, because I think scarflets will be a really great like transition. And then clearly we move to cowls and Cowltober, and then gift knitting when we get to the end of the year. So that's my thought, is our next knit along in the Facebook group will be scarflets. I think I have like 10 or 15 scarflet patterns. So you can start to know that they're really great for stash diving, doing scarflets. You probably won't even need to go buy yarn to whip out one or two of those. And then you will also have, someone just had a very good idea of another scarflet for this yarn. They suggested nice and nice. This would make a nice. Really nice. Both of them. And someone else says that Fnugg is their new favorite word. I love that. So that is the yarn I bought. And then the books. I kind of joked with Max, and I told him that one of the reasons we went to the Faroe Islands was so that I could buy these books, because you cannot find them anywhere in the States. And I ended up buying 2 of each of them. And one of them is going to be the giveaway at the end of this live. And then one of them I'm going to use for a giveaway on Instagram. I've been doing kind of like a monthly giveaway on Instagram. So I'm going to do one in each place. And this book right here, I am going to butcher this if I attempt to say this name out loud, but I made some notes and I just have to find them. Oh, I know where I made the notes. They're on my sheet. Let's try that. So this is the Faroese Patterns knitting book. That's what this translates to in English. And the story behind this book is that a number of Faroese sweaters were exhibited in Copenhagen in 1921, and Queen Alexandrine was enchanted by the color motifs, and she thought it was a shame that word-of-mouth patterns could disappear, and requested that they be collected in a book. And so Hans Marius Debes, who is the person who put this book together, traveled to the Faroe Islands to document the Faroese national heritage within knitting patterns. And then he published this book in 1932. So this book has been around for quite a few years. It is not easy to find. I believe it is the last copy that I got when I was in Faroe. This publishing was from 2015. There are a few copies of it available on the Navia website, and I'll give you a link to that. I don't know how many they have, but if I hold it up and kind of show you what's happening, it has all of the really basic 2-color patterns that were really kind of iconic for Faroese sweater knitting. So I'm just going to kind of like flip through. Some of these are 3-color, obviously. There are a lot that are 2-color. They're very different when I think about like when I think about Shetland stitch patterns. These are really like iconic and unique to Faroese knitting. There's a lot that you could play with and mash up together. I definitely saw a few pillow covers that used kind of like these stitches. They have this kind of like moving waves. There's a lot in black and white in the back of the book. And that star sweater that I showed you that Gudrun and Gudrun designed, that star sweater is kind of like a modernized version of a star. It might be this one down here, but it might be another one in here. I haven't flipped through all the way to try to find it. But it is a really cool, simple pattern book. And for those of you who like I know there's some of you who like knitting books as much as I love knitting books. I am very excited about this knitting book and very happy to have one in my collection. And then the other knitting book I got is this classic book on knitting a traditional Faroese shawl. So there's a shawl shaping called a Faroese shawl shape that you might be familiar with that has a center back spine. But what it has that's even more unique besides that center back panel is it sits on the shoulders really beautifully. And it's because up at the top of the shawl, there are some strategically placed decreases that create like little darts at the top of the shawl that help it really like curve beautifully to the body. So if I show you this book under the camera just a tiny bit, it has the basic pattern written out in 3 different languages. One of those languages, luckily for us, is in English. So there's like a very basic pattern for how to get the shaping of the shawl. And I love this little foreword right here. In bygone days, the Faroese women wore a knitted shawl. It is warm, comfortable, practical, and essentially feminine. Perhaps it is part of the rediscovery of the values of the past that the shawl has come into its own again. Young women take pride in wearing this simple, elegant garment that has been worn for generations. The diagram and knitting instructions are for a basic shawl pattern. The design around the border can be varied at will from the 215 designs included in this book. These designs can also be used on many other knitted garments for cross-stitch embroidery or in weaving. So you get the basic pattern in the book, and then the rest of the book is all of the different designs that you can do. These are all like these really basic graphic lace stitches, and you can expect to see the things kind of playing off of this. I think I could do some really interesting beadwork using some of these designs. I am going to have a very good time with this book over the next few years. And then if I try to show you just a few of the photos, I don't know how easily those are showing of the shawls being worn. And you can see this whole lace area right here. That is one of the 215 designs that is written out in this book. So I think that this book is a national treasure as well. It's written by Olivia Joensen. I'm sure I did not say that correctly. I believe that she is from Larvik, which is the second town that we stayed in, with that beautiful view of the harbor. I didn't see a knitting store in Larvik, although I'm sure there was one, because how could there not be a knitting store when that tiny little town of Kvivik had 2 of them? It's just sometimes you don't stumble across everything, right? So these 2 books, one of them is going to be the giveaway for tonight. I do need to just talk about a few things quickly, and then we're going to wrap up because this is officially the longest live ever, which I knew was going to happen tonight. Sorry, I had to have a little drink. So I'm not going to go over what I've been reading and watching and listening to, because I have been just living and breathing Pharaoh. I think it's pretty obvious what I've been doing and inspired by lately. In terms of sewing, I haven't sewn since we left, but I did stumble across during Me Made May a pair of pants called the Magic Pants by Ann Tilly Handmade, and hopefully by the time I do another live I'll have a pair of them finished to show you. And I'm incredibly sewers, this is for the sewers out there, I'm incredibly intrigued by these pants because they have like almost a maternity panel of knit fabric built into them, so they look really like tailored, and they have this very flat kind of like sailor pant front, but they just kind of cinch with D-rings and snaps and this like knit panel that tucks things in at the waist. And I'm so intrigued by them. I'm worried that the leg is a little bit wide on them for me, so I might do some kind of like slashing to get that wideness out of the pattern a little bit, but I'll probably make a muslin first to see how that works before I do any changing of the pattern. That's always a wise idea. So I'm planning on sewing those this summer. I'm going to do that with the group I made bags with, so I'm looking forward to that. And then the winner of last 2 months ago. The last live is Ruth Velasco Schmitz. And I asked you all about like fun bushes you love for gardens, because I've been kind of doing some resetting in some of my garden beds. And Ruth suggested elderberries, and she particularly suggested a lemon lace elderberry and a black lace elderberry. And I am happy to announce that I have both of those elderberry bushes already in my garden. They are absolutely gorgeous. The lemon lace is trying to get going, but the black lace one is off and running. So I'm going to actually move the lemon lace. I think it's needing to cross-pollinate with something else. So Ruth, you are going to win this awesome skein of worsted weight yarn for knitting a pair of larch slippers with when that pattern comes out. So get in touch with me and I will get this skein of yarn to you. And then I am going to ask you as the prompt for the giveaway for this live. Before I do that, I want to ask if there are any questions that anybody has before I kind of end things out. I've had an eye. You all have done a great job at answering each other's questions in the comments, which I really appreciate. I really appreciate that a lot. So Max is here to help me wrap up things because it's time. Max and Buffy have come back to the air conditioning. They needed it. It's hot in the rest of the house. This is the best place to be. I'm serious. So the prompt for this giveaway, and you're not going to leave that in the live chat. You are going to leave your comment in the comments underneath this video once it is over. And I'd love to know from you, what was your favorite part of this live tonight? Like some takeaway you got from it. Something about Faroe Islands. If you have a question that I didn't get to, maybe I'll be able to answer that for you. If there's something else I said that really intrigued you. It's fun for me to get feedback and find out like what's working and not working. These are a fair amount of work to put together. I love doing them, but I also love your feedback to keep them better. And I'm hoping that we'll do another live at the end of July. That's going to depend a little bit on a few things with scheduling, but my email list is the best way to find out when another live is scheduled. And then I also try to get it on my YouTube channel like a good 5 or 6 days beforehand. And if you're subscribed to my channel, then you will hear about it. So I thank you so much for watching. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. I really appreciate all of your support, and I look forward to seeing you over in Ravelry, Facebook, wherever, Instagram, wherever our paths cross. I so appreciate having you all as part of my creative journey. Happy knitting.